Thanks. All right, where we get started. Good morning to everyone. This is the legislative press briefing that I do before council meetings, and tomorrow, April 4th, we will have our fifth legislative meeting of council period 25. The agenda is relatively speaking light, and I believe that because the meetings are now in the middle of so there are a number of bills that are for first and second and final reading, but I don't think any of the bills have been particularly newsworthy, like some street namings. Most of the street namings, probably the most interest would be the final reading on the Street Vendor Advancement Amendment Act. We'll have an elimination of substitute. All this does is to simplify what we have in the regulations regarding street vending, criminalizing it, which does not mean that people get to violate the law. It just means that if there are violations, they'll be civilly enforced. And to try to just bring greater clarity and order to the vending process for the pilot in the Columbia Heights area. Included in the regulatory scheme is that vending area might have a vending manager who will be somebody who's responsible for the vendors for order and compliance. At first reading, there was some discussion about the bill making changes to the licensing law regarding cottage food industry. What that refers to really is people who are selling food that they cook themselves. The amendment substitute is going to take a different approach rather than amend the cottage food industry license law would create a new license category that would be applicable for street vendors. The goal here is to make it minimally barrier. I think of the right phrase. I don't want to say barrier free, but minimally difficult for vendors to be able to get licenses. At the same time, if they're vending the food, that there are public health standards and consumers can be confident that their food is safe. So that's in the amendment of substitute that will circulate today. On the emergency legislation, I don't think there's really anything controversial here either. There's some clarification regarding limiting food delivery fees. These are the apps where a customer can go to the app to order food that then gets delivered to them. Since we changed the law, we voted last December to change the law. Apparently, there have been some instances where restaurants are paying 55%. And making it very profitless for them. So this is trying to fix that. The emergency bill that was noticed that may be getting a lot of attention is dealing with rent increases. That legislation probably will not go forward because there may be a fiscal impact to it. And we cannot adopt on an emergency basis, a temporary basis, a bill that's subject to funding. That if and when it occurs, occur after the emergency expires. There are a number of contracts for the housing authority that are on the agenda that Councilmember Robert White is moving. I don't believe any of them are controversial. And I think with that, I'm going to go to a different issue, which is just to review the budget schedule. So the mayor submitted her budget on March 22nd. I would say the council members are not enthusiastic about the proposed budget, because there are a lot of cuts to existing programs across the board. Members are trying to figure out now which of those cuts would really be sustainable and which of those we should try to fix. The mayor submits a balanced budget, so any changes the council makes would require rather additions to then have subtraction somewhere else. And so that's what is happening now is the council hearings to sort this out. The committee of the whole will have a hearing on April 14th on all of the budget measures. That would be the local budget act for 2024, as well as the supplemental budget for 2023, as well as the federal portion request act, as well as the budget support act. That's April 14th. The council will have a work session that is televised on May 3rd, and first reading will be May 16th. The first reading will be the local budget act for 2024, the first reading of the budget support act. The supplemental and the federal will occur at second reading 2 weeks later, that's May 30th. Budget support act, final reading probably be early. So happy to take questions on that in a moment. The other issue I wanted to touch on briefly was, as I think you all know, the Councilmember Allen and I appeared before the House Oversight Committee last Wednesday. I think that based on the questioning we got, we tended to be fairly aggressive from Republican members that they were hoping to score a lot of points against the district, and I'm hopeful that they felt disappointed in their goal. The Councilmember Allen and I tried to be clear that the district is well managed. The committee had invited the Chief Financial Officer, Glenn Lee, who was no help to the Republicans. That's his answer. This was well managed, and the district's finances were in excellent condition. So they didn't really have a lot of questions for him because he wasn't giving the answers they wanted to hear. And Councilmember Allen and myself were similar in our answers that the district was well managed. Perhaps the most points that Republicans scored, if you could put it that way, would be questions of the FOP chairman, who said that council legislation is the cause of crime, and whether or not or police officers on the force. So we pointed out that the other agencies, agencies in the city as well as around the country have high vacancy rates because policing as a vocation is less attractive around the country right now. I hope that changes. And Councilmember Allen and I made it clear that we supported budget requests for hiring police officers and providing incentives. So the House and the Senate are in recess right now, and when and if the police accountability bill goes before the full House, and not until after the recess. Given the president's veto message, I'm hopeful that we will see this legislation not be overridden. It is about police accountability, and as I noted in the hearings, there have been many instances where police bargaining their own discipline resulted in bad cops being on the force, being put back on the force, or being paid off. When I say paid off, I mean the city's ordered to pay back wages, totaling millions and millions of dollars. So the bill seeks to fix all that, and so I'm hopeful that it will not be overridden. With that, I'm happy to take questions. Yes, sir.
In regards to the vending bill, would you mind going over what's happening as far as the licensing for food cooked at home?
Yes, that's called the cottage food license, and at first reading the bill made changes, substantial changes to the cottage food license, and that provoked quite a bit of discussion from council members. Councilmember Councilmembers Henderson, Nadeau, and myself have worked out a different approach, which is what we'll be moving tomorrow. And that is to create a different license category. Rather than amending cottage food industry license to have a different category that's more specific to vendors who are cooking. It still would have to be a kitchen that's inspected and other health safety requirements, but it would not be as onerous as the cottage food license.
As far as the requirements, what off the top of your head, what would they be?
Well, off the top of my head, the one that I remember is that there still would have to be an inspection of the company facility. I'll be circulating that in the memo. Should explain it. Okay.
You mentioned the effort in Congress to overturn the policing bill. Have you had any conversations with the Senate on the likelihood that they would send that bill to the president's desk for him to veto?
There have been some conversations. I've not personally had them. My office has. We haven't gotten to that point because where we are right now is doing our best to make sure that it's to enhance the possibility that the Senate would not vote to override.
And generally speaking, what do you make of Congress's sort of increased oversight, let's say, of the DC government? Do you expect this to continue over the next 2 years?
So I expect the oversight to continue. Maybe I don't want to phrase it that way. Do I expect that this level of oversight and interference will continue? I'm hopeful that it will subside a bit, but what we saw with the criminal code revision bill was that Republicans, and I was criticized for making this partisan. I don't mean to make it partisan, but this has been initiated by Republican members of Congress, and what they saw with the criminal code bill was an opportunity to make that a national issue and put Democrats on the defensive. Unfortunately, a lot of that debate had to do with, on the Republican side, the criminal code being soft on crime, which it wasn't, as I pointed out last week, and on the Democrat side, talking about statehood and home rule. And while the council, every member of the council fully supports statehood, I think there has to be some discussion of the merits, and there was not enough of that. The Republicans were able to frame the agenda as being about crime and being soft on crime, which it wasn't. And just to give you an example, so there was that horrific incident where a Senate aide was attacked on H Street. I guess it was now a little over a week ago, and under the current criminal code, for his crime, assuming that the person who was arrested is guilty, under the current criminal code, he would be eligible for 15 years maximum in prison. Under the revised criminal code, the so-called soft on crime code, he would be eligible for 27 years in prison. And that's fairly consistent with a number of other crimes, because the way you have to read the revised criminal code is a layering of charges, different elements of an offense. And when you add them up and stack them, you find that the maximum penalty in many instances is greater than what is afforded under the current. But who knew? Because the debate was all about the district on the defensive for being soft on. So anyway, there was a digression from answering your question. That what Republicans saw was that they could beat up on the district nationally, put Democrats on the defensive. I think the framing of the police accountability bill is different, and it's just hard to defend having that house on the court. I gave the example of a police officer who was accused of raping a college girl, and the chief, this is a few years ago, a different chief terminated that police officer, and the disciplinary process bargained by the union, required arbitration, and the arbitrator said, well, the girl was too drunk to be able to be a credible witness, and so therefore the police officer should be reinstated. That's just wrong.
I've got another question.
Other questions, Senator?
So,
So on the 14th, from your vantage point, what would be on the chopping block if we're talking about
On the 14th, what?
14th of April?
Yeah.
When all the budget items come together, discussing it, what's on the chopping block if the council was not at this point completely satisfied with?
Well, that's just a public hearing. So it's public comment, but right now, if somebody wants to testify before the council, they go before a committee and testify about an agency in that committee. They don't get an opportunity, or they don't get an opportunity to talk about any aspect of the budget.
So I guess my question, if I could just be more specific, is in your eyes, what should be on the chopping block if we're talking, because I know last time we discussed certain things that the mayor cut that you weren't satisfied about, but given what we've collected so far in the hearings, what should be on the chopping block?
Well, I think we're going to see a lot of adjustments. The adjustments may tend to be relatively minor given the austereness of our budget. Let me be clear. We're not looking at a budget where the city's revenues have dropped and we have to be cutting. We're looking at a budget where revenue growth is less than expected. And so as the city was expanding, now suddenly that expansion has to stop and has to be a little bit. So I think we're going to see a lot of little adjustments. For instance, the committee of the whole, we want to restore 22 inspectors to the department buildings. And that, well, I think that's important in the scheme of a $19 billion budget. It's sort of a little thing. One of the big ticket items is the emergency rental assistance program. And I can say with confidence that members would like to see more money in ERAP, emergency rental assistance program. ERAP is a safety net program for those families or individuals who are unable to pay their rent and are being evicted. And ERAP will keep them from being evicted. That's a good thing. And will also, and so we're going to keep them from going into homelessness. It's also a good thing. This year, halfway through the year, we've gone through $43 million for next year's budget, and that will be $8 million. So those are good items.
Sorry, go ahead, Mark. There you go. Two profit questions on I guess the temporary schedule here. Rewind. The revised criminal code act, how are talks going on revising that and resubmitting it?
To be honest with you, there hasn't been much discussion. So as you know, I withdrew it. There were some folks who said I didn't have the authority to, but I withdrew it. And so the reality is that it's not law. And but the council's been focused on I would say consumed with the budget, and so they're having discussions with that.
And you've got a couple of bills on here, one on the use of force board and another on an amendment to the policing law. Can you talk a little bit about why those are necessary and if
Sure.
the kerfuffle with Congress?
So the use of force board, I'm glad you asked that because that use of force board is one of the provisions that's in the police accountability bill that the House is challenging. The emergency here is because the chief of police wants to be able to make his appointments now. And there were some changes in that police accountability bill that empower the chief. That's true with a lot of provisions in the police accountability bill, that there are provisions that empower the chief. We wanted to move this quicker, so that's why that's on the agenda. The other that you mentioned, which is the bill itself, it's just because with congressional review, we do emergencies. In fact, this police accountability bill has been law, not in identical form, but substantially similar since 2020. And when we do temporary legislation, we do a 90-day bill. Because that's all we can do by emergency, and then we do a 225-day temporary bill. And the temporary bill goes up to Congress. So this police accounting bill has been before Congress 3 times already. And so it's gone through congressional review 3 times. This would be the 4th time, except the permanent bill is up there now. But we always do emergency and temporary together. Martin, you look like you had a question.
Yeah, on the budget, given the, austereness of the current situation, the fact that you guys aren't gonna be able to move a ton of money around, would there be any consideration about potential tax increases, whether on the income side or residential property taxes?
I think not. We have a tax revision commission that's working, and I'm hesitant. I would be hesitant to see any changes to our taxes before we get the recommendation. The tax revision commission should be looking at our entire tax structure with an eye toward how all the different pieces relate or interrelate. And so for us to step in and do something temporary here, kind of mess that up. I think also that a lot of people realize that, particularly with the business community, but more generally, there's just enough uncertainty about what the future looks like that we don't need to create more uncertainty by changing taxes.
All right, and then smaller issues. What's the Historic Preservation of Derelict District Properties Extension Temporary Amendment Act, other than really wordy?
I know, we're trying to see if we can come up with a bill with this title. And that one doesn't do it. You may remember the 4 houses in Anacostia that were in the news about 5 years ago. These were houses that the city owned, was doing nothing with, were falling apart in the historic district, so the city is required to maintain them or to rebuild them. And a nonprofit came along and said, if you give us the property, we will rehabilitate them at no cost to the city. I use that tone because I think it's such a good deal and it still was a fight. We had put in a 5-year sunset, and the 4th house is just beginning to get underway. The other 3 houses have been fully renovated, and it's really been very, very good, but it's taken longer than we thought, so that deals with that.
And then last one, the African American Civil War Museum and Ben's Chili Bowl Limited Grant Making Authority Temporary Amendment Act.
I'd like to say free hot dogs for everybody, but that'll get me in trouble. These measures would authorize on an emergency and temporary basis the Chesapeake County Economic Development to issue a grant in the current fiscal year, next fiscal year, to support renovations to the Ben's Chili Bowl use location, and to issue a grant to the African American Civil War Memorial Freedom Foundation for the purpose of redeveloping the African American Civil War Museum. That's all I know. That was in the notice from Councilman Doe. You could follow up with her regarding Ben's Chili Bowl. I know that the African American Civil War Museum is supposed to return to the Grimke building, and there's some build out costs, and I'm pretty sure that's what that is. Fascinating.
It's been a long time.
But
It's been a long time since I think before it moved out of the Grimke.
Mr. Rice, over here.
Yes. Have you had any conversations with the White House about the whole criminal code, police accountability?
My office has had some conversations with the White House regarding the police accountability bill. And I think that's all I'm going to say. But I do want to note that our police accountability bill is similar to the George Floyd called Justice and Policing Act. That has not gotten through Congress, but had a lot of support. It's different in that one of the issues that broke down in the Congress was over qualified immunity. Our bill doesn't deal with that, so The controversial item in the federal bill is not in the local bill, but otherwise it's very similar. And I think that's part of the reason why the White House is supporting. Because they've been supportive of that legislation. You look like I didn't completely answer.
Well, I'd be interested if you could give us a hint, a clue, a suggestion of your talks, your signals, smokes signals across Pennsylvania.
I'll give you this hint. The
Who'd you talk to?
White House issued a statement last week saying they would veto the legislation. Veto an override. They like the comprehensive policing and justice reform bill. And as I said, it's similar to the George Floyd policing and justice reform bill.
Do you think the Senate will? How do you think the Senate will vote if it gets to?
You know, in this business, sometimes you don't make a prediction. But our goal is to have at least 51 votes.
Do you think it'll pass the House?
So far, yeah. I mean, I'd like to think it won't, but there would need to be some Republicans who cross the aisle. And what we saw last week was at the hearing was that there were several Republicans who seemed reasonable and interested. And I don't know if they voted when the committee voted later in the day, but that committee voted party line. So that leads me to think that the House would vote party line. And I think that's unfortunate because, as I said, this bill is not. This bill is about police accountability, and among other things, will help the chief of police significantly with regard to having a better police force and building trust by the community in the police, which is critical. So, if you want to reduce crime, which is what the Republicans were claiming, then they should not be overriding this bill. Which reminds me, they also the position that Councilor Allen and myself was if you, meaning the committee, really care about crime in the district and want to help get more resources to the U.S. Attorney, and actually ask the U.S. Attorney why he declines 2/3 of the cases he's bringing. That's federal. That's not DC. If you committee want to reduce crime in the district, then why don't we talk to the Bureau of Prisons, which releases inmates without notice to the city and without any re-entry preparation. So the perpetrator of that horrific incident on A Street had been released the day before. Released by the Bureau of Prisons, the Federal Bureau of Prisons, no notice to the district, and was remanded to the custody or supervision, I should say, of CISO's federal agency without notice to the district. And but we get blamed for this. So you, member of Congress, if you care about public safety, help us with these federal things.
Excuse me, in that connection, I was struck by the statement of Pete Sessions, who said, he was, to me, at least one of the ones that you may be referring to, said, I want to work with you. He used the word success. And he also said he was going to write to the U.S. Attorney about the low prosecution rate. Do you know?
I don't know if he's written that letter. But yes, he was one of those who seemed genuinely interested in helping the problem.
Care to name any others?
I could. That's right.
Just real quick on food delivery fees, do you get a sense that there's going to be any disagreement or fights over this one, or is it going to pass pretty easily?
At the moment, I think that there'll be some discussion. I think members will be supportive. You know, we probably don't know this, but staff have a call before the legislative issues are identified there, and then the members meet our legislative breakfast that, where we discuss, and, so we'll see that discussion if there's any objection. My guess is there'll be discussion, but not objection.
Will that be here tomorrow?
Yes. Yes. The council is finally back to having breakfast at its legislative breakfast. The emergency ensures that meal delivery services do not transform the lower 15% commission fee level into a sham offer, thereby forcing restaurants to choose between withdrawing from the platforms or opting into a higher commission fee level. It does this by clarifying what constitutes a core delivery service under the Act and prohibiting third-party delivery services from listing a restaurant at the very end of the list of restaurants within a category, merely because the restaurant opted to receive core delivery services at the 15% commission fee level.
Follow-up question, was your meeting with the White House before the veto message was conveyed?
There was some conversation. You want me to name names?
Please,
I could.
name names, what was the nature? Or why is the president saying he's going to veto the accountability, the bad cop bill, whereas of course he signed the criminal justice reform override?
Justice code reform got caught up in politics. It was not about crime. We know that sentencing does not research after research has shown that sentencing does not have a deterrent effect on crime. I know a lot of people think it does. It doesn't. Sentencing is important. It's critical to the criminal justice process. But you know, there's a 30-year mandatory minimum under current law for first-degree homicide. Most shootings, in my view, are premeditated and therefore are first degree. Does it have a deterrent effect? No. Now it's not to say we shouldn't have sentencing and tough sentencing, but the sentencing, the criminal code reform bill got caught up in this message that it was soft on crime, that it was going to perpetuate crime. It put the Democrats on the defensive, which is exactly what the Republicans wanted. There's no question in my mind that it came from the Republicans and the Democrats. And I say that because somebody criticized me for being partisan. I'm not trying to be partisan. But the reality is that the Democrats who voted against the district came to that position late. And they came to that position late because they really didn't want to be there. They were being labeled soft on crime, which is not where they wanted to be. And that got caught up in the national politics, it made the national news, it was headline news across the country, and the Democrats were looking bad, and so the president, to help his party, took the position he did.
Has the oversight committee or any other congressional committees, has the oversight committee or any other congressional committees indicated they want you back anytime soon?
No, they did not. I'm more than happy to come back and talk with them. I know that there's some folks who think that we should, if we believe in hands-off DC, that we shouldn't cooperate with them at all. Treat other legislatures with respect and recognize the role that Congress has right now. So it could be respected. If they want me to come back, I'd be happy.
Would you ever think of inviting congressional staffers or members of Congress for like a field trip to the Wilson Building and like they speak in at a
Eat a breakfast.
council hearing? Yeah, to breakfast. I think they'd like breakfast.
They like breakfast. We like bacon. I don't know about them. It's an interesting idea. Any other questions?
Can I ask broadly what these three bills trying to overturn DC law have done for the cause for DC statehood, in your estimation?
Well, I was going to two audiences. One is residents. It's clarified for them the value of statehood. The other audience is members of Congress, because they're the ones that come forward. And I think it's a set us back. How much, don't know, I don't know that I want to speculate, but it's set us back. Maybe there's a third audience, the national audience, and I would say my sense is it's mixed there. I'm thinking what's actually going to my mind is the national attention to the exchange between Congressman Boebert and Charles Allen, where I think that people who watched it might have become more sympathetic to the district. You know the question?
Yeah.
Real quick. The modification numbers 19 and 20 to the human care agreement. What are we looking at?
What page are you on?
5.
Which number?
Number 8.
It's me. Let me take the contract summary. The city office of state superintendent of education, OSSI, needs the flexibility to order nursing services to ensure they have an adequate number of nurses at any given time to assist during the school year to eligible students. DigiDoc has over 20 years of experience providing medical staffing services. Contractor received the 2010 Washington DC Small Business of the Year Award. The measurement before the council would raise the contract ceiling amount between OSSI and DigiDoc. It's not a lot of money. It was originally, the contract was originally $990,000.
How much?
With $990,000. Modification number 19. Modification 19 to 20, it's now $1,740,000. Ms. Brightside, did you have your hand up?
Yeah. Yeah, you were the one who acted to try and prevent the Senate from that overwhelming vote, which might be characterized against the district where only 14 Democratic senators supported the district.
Yeah.
In retrospect, should there have been better intelligence about that whole situation as soon as the Republicans took over the House, that things were different and maybe the bill should not have had the controversial provisions that were used by the Republicans to characterize the district as soft on crime?
It's always easy to Monday morning quarterback. I said that I think that council could have done better in messaging and framing the bill. But the timing, it would have been difficult to have gotten that bill to the Hill during the Democratic controlled House last year. And the reason is because it's very complex, complicated, lengthy bill. I mean, it completely rewrites the criminal code. And if we'd gotten it out 3 months earlier, it still would have probably required to be retransmitted to Congress's cabinet. That's the problem with congressional review. And so I don't think we could have avoided the timing. But I think we could have, I think we could have messaged it better so that it would have been harder to frame it as a soft on crime. With regard to taking out the controversial provisions, I believe that that would have been a game of whack-a-mole. Take out this controversial provision, there'll be another one. I mean, the framing of the argument around carjacking is wrong. Right now, the maximum penalty is 40 years. The average sentence is 15. The revised criminal code lowered the maximum to 24 years. The average sentence right now is 15. 24 years is double what the sentence is in, I believe it's Arizona, the maximum, maybe double what it is in Tennessee, if I remember correctly. So there was nothing unreasonable about 24, but yes, you could say we lowered the maximum 40, which nobody got, to 24, which is more than the average sentence. So if we had not done that, there would have been something else that would have been. Because as I said, the code is written in such a way that individual elements of a crime have a sentence. And so if you pick out that individual element, you could say compared to the current law that it's a lesser penalty. But you really have to read it in terms of the potential for stacking the charges and therefore getting them more actually a stricter or lengthier sentence. Point being that if we fixed that one, there would have been something else. If we fixed that, there would have been something else. I think we're good. I'll see you all tomorrow. The committee of the whole, I forgot to say this, will be meeting at 11. And the legislative meeting will follow immediately thereafter. Thank you all.